You're watching Glove Fist with boxing experts Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch, the best boxing show on the internet.
If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch.
There's a little girl in our neighborhood.
Mac, you got to get some songs I like.
You got to get Matt out of there unless he has something to say about boxing to start off the show.
It's a great song. What are you talking about, Frank? Anyway, guys, folks, the best boxing experts on social media, Frank Latirzo and Jack Hirsch.
Mac is our producer, so if the ratings are down, blame him.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Latirzo, part-time writer, full-time observer, joined by esteemed co-host Jack Hirsch, who has Don King's phone number in his phone that I just found out. Jack, you were away last week. You were missed. Henry Haskap filled in. We had a good time. We're going to talk about that a little later in the show, but how are you tonight?
Real good and glad Henry filled in. Henry's a good friend of mine. He works closely with me in the boxing business, and you're not going to find a more knowledgeable guy. He's a true historian, Frank. We know a lot about boxing, but you and I aren't true historians because we don't.
No, not like him.
Data. Henry is a true historian because he keeps the data. He keeps the stats.
Jack, he does. He has an interesting system to which he evaluates fighters. We had a great conversation. We mocked you a little bit. I don't know if you watched.
I didn't hear. I didn't hear the. I didn't hear the show. I got to be honest about it. I went on your good word, but I did hear Frank. Henry accomplished something with you that I've never been able to accomplish. He made you into a Mayweather believer, and
yeah,
now
that's it.
You feel Mayweather really might be on the list of one of the greatest of all time, or the greatest fighter the last, 30 years or so. You'll give him that much at least.
He's in the conversation. I'll give you that. But no, Henry didn't sway me.
He's in a conversation. I can name 20 guys in the conversation. Come on, I mean.
Okay. And Jack, we'll get to that when we talk about Henry's system, because I don't think it's infallible, even though I like it and I respect it. But where we had fun at your expense was, and you can blame me for this, is that Henry and I came to two conclusions. Sugar Ray Robinson is the greatest fighter that's ever lived. And it's written in stone. We don't care what you say. It's written in stone.
I'm halfway. No. I never said he wasn't.
You said it's not written in stone.
It's not written in stone. You can make a compelling argument for other fighters.
And that's where we disagree with you.
Good argument that had Roberto Duran retired after the first Sugar Ray Leonard fight, you could conceivably have called him the greatest fighter pound for pound of all time. Had he retired after that first fight, had Roy Jones retired after John Ruiz, you could have conceivably, I'm not saying I would have you, but you could have conceivably have called him the greatest fighter pound for pound of all time, because not so much because of his opposition, but because of the level of dominance he showed. No other fighter in their prime ever showed the level of dominance that Roy Jones did.
Okay. And it's funny, Henry and I off air talked about Roy Jones had he retired after Ruiz. And it's funny, we both mentioned that at the same time. And you mentioned Duran defeating Leonard, which I say is one of the greatest wins in history. I will give you this, Jack. If you want to say they're among the top 5, if they never fought again after that, I will see that. But they were not a better fighter than Robinson. So I would never entertain the argument that they equal or surpass him, but they could get into that upper 5 all-time top 10 category or top 5, and they're already in the top 10.
Well,
Not Roy.
Once in a while, you get an athlete that's way ahead of his time, decades ahead of his time, shows a certain athleticism and skill level that was never seen before. And when Robinson burst on the scene, there was never anyone really like him beforehand. It would be years late until perhaps Muhammad Ali came along that we'd see someone similar. Ali couldn't punch like Robinson, so I'm not making that comparison. But Ali was an athlete ahead of his time. Michael Jordan was ahead of his time. Jimmy Brown was ahead of his time.
Absolutely.
So people say Jimmy Brown was the greatest running back of all time. Maybe he is. But it took many years before we could have someone who could maybe compare to Jimmy Brown a little bit. And then you get a number of running backs would be great, who you could maybe make an argument on their behalf, like a Barry Sanders. I could say Barry Sanders was better than Jimmy Brown, and you could disagree. And I'm not saying I'm saying that, but you could make the compelling argument. And that's the type of argument that I make when I say, well, you could compare Sugar Ray Leonard and put him on a par with Sugar Ray Robinson, just like I'm saying you could put Barry Sanders on the par with Jim Brown.
Jack, I agree with that. The only contention I have is I just think that Robinson, if it's a horse race, is more links ahead of Leonard than Jim Brown is Barry Sanders. That's the only part I'll disagree with.
Okay, that's fine. But listen, I have no argument with calling Robinson the greatest of all time, pound for pound. If I had to pick one fighter, I would probably settle on Sugar Ray Robinson. I would settle on him, but it wouldn't be an automatic. I would look at all the other candidates the way we're talking now. I'd look at their whole careers, and when all is said and done, I would pick Robinson, but it's not a no-brainer the way you're making it out to be. That's my point.
Okay.
Be giving it thought, and then eventually, yeah, I'm good with it.
Jack, let's cover a couple topics and then get into how Henry breaks fighters' careers down, and the topic you want to talk about regarding about pros fighting in the Olympics. And then I'd like to touch on guys that had that mission night where they were on a mission and they weren't going to lose. But let's hit two things first. Let's talk about the Mabili Derevyanchenko fight.
Yeah.
First, did you see the fight? And if you did,
see the fight.
What's your takeaway? I saw it too.
My takeaway is Mabili missed an opportunity to make a major statement. All in all, the night was a success, but there was a lot of intrigue surrounding him going into this fight. I saw his last fight where he knocked out Mark Heffron in 40 seconds with a body shot. And he was supposed to be like an assassin. You know, all of a sudden he was lurking kind of on the outside of Canelo's radar as a big name fight. In other words, Mabili was trying to be the next David Benavidez, the next bad boy, the next guy that, you know, is going to be feared. But he needed to make that statement.
You don't think he did?
Would have been, well, you could look at it this way. He fought Derevyanchenko, and you can make an argument that he beat Derevyanchenko, who has never stopped before, more decisively than any of the past opponents that Derevyanchenko has fought. But the thing about it is, the only time Sergey, and I'm tongue-tied, Sergey D, I'll call him, was beaten decisively was by Jermell Charlo. And Mabili even beat him more decisively in this fight, but he didn't stop him. And that was the intrigue surrounding this fight. Is he going to be the first one to do it? And Derevyanchenko suffered a bicep injury in the fourth round. He won that round, the only round of the fight he won, in my opinion. And he lost 98-92, 99-91, and 100-90 on the cards. it wouldn't have made a difference whether he hurt the arm or not. But by the later rounds, it was more survival. He was a one-armed fighter, yet he hung tough and went the distance with Mabili and never got knocked down. So it was a successful night, beating one of the top gatekeepers in boxing, but he didn't make that extra oomph, Frank. He didn't excite us. He just showed us, hey, he's a heck of a good fighter, but not the boogeyman, you kind of wanted to see.
All right, I'll give you that. I'm going to take your role here, and I'm going to go devil's advocate. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but a former football coach who we both think a lot of, who had a horse that won Saturday at Saratoga, by the name of Bill Parcells, had his saying, and he says, he says, those other guys get a check too, and they get paid. And Derevyanchenko, as you said, Jack, has never been stopped. So he gets, it's not easy to stop him. People are going to say he's 37 and he's a gatekeeper, but he's never been stopped. He was never defeated that conclusively. And you could make a case. I'm not sure that I would make it. And when I watched the fight live and the commentators were calling for it, mainly Tim Bradley, they thought the fight should have been stopped. I'm not sure I would have stopped it, because if I let him go 10 rounds and the only thing he could do to save face was go the distance, and he's never been stopped before, he's probably not going to fight any big fights again, I would have leaned towards letting the fight go. But there is a case that it could have been stopped because, as you said, he only won one round. I agree with you, but I'm going to give a little credit to Derevyanchenko for being such a tough guy who's never been stopped.
You make a very interesting point, Frank, that during the later rounds of the fight, I was kind of torn a little whether they should stop it or not.
It was a close call.
I was leaning on the side that they absolutely should stop it. He had no chance of coming back and winning, none. He's not a puncher, Derevyanchenko, as is. It wasn't going to turn the fight around. No way. So I wanted it stopped on that account. But then again, if he's never going to fight again and he's never been stopped, and if that's really important to him, to go your whole career and not be stopped, and he's going to call it a day after this fight, I can understand they navigated him through the distance. So as critical I was of his cornerman, his top cornerman, and Andre Rozier, who's a very nice guy, by the way, as critical as I felt towards him during the fight, I also give him a lot of credit. He wasn't giving fake information. Oh, you can win the fight. It's like they conceded the fight, and they were trying to navigate Derevyanchenko through the rounds, get him through the fight, as opposed to giving him these lies. Oh, you could knock him out, do this, do that. So they were giving actually sound advice. But one thing you never do, Frank, you agree with me with this. You never don't ask for a fight that you want to continue.
No, they're never going to say it.
Yeah.
I mean, very few and far between. Jack, I'll say this. When I was watching the fight in the moment, after the 10th round, maybe even in the 10th round, I wanted Derevyanchenko to go the distance, but I was holding my breath during the 11th and the 12th because I didn't want to see him get hurt. And actually, at the end of the 12th round, he did make a little run to save face. He didn't win the round, but and I know that a guy that's never really won the title, that's a big thing to him to say, I fought this guy, and this guy, like a George Chuvalo, and I was never down or I was never stopped. So I was pulling for him to go the distance. I thought it was a close call. I'm glad it went the way it did. Now, let's talk a little X's and O's. What I saw in that fight is this. If you go to the ropes against Mabili, he's a poor man's George Foreman, and you don't want to be on the ropes and have him hit on you. But if you pick up your feet and you give him some movement, which Sergey did during that fight, you can nullify him a little bit. And see, Canelo, that's not who he is. So I think it would be an interesting fight to see him in Canelo if we never get Benavidez.
Let me ask you this. His showing, Mabili's showing, what effect do you think it had on Canelo? Canelo took notice one way or the other. I find it hard to believe that Canelo didn't see the fight, doesn't think about his future opponent.
We know he saw it.
And is he the type of fighter that Canelo would fight? Would Canelo consider him too risky?
Jack, I actually think there were two big fights the last couple of weeks. We had Crawford and Madrimov, and we had Mabili fight Serenchenko. And I have no doubt in my mind that Canelo watched them both. And I believe based off of those two fights, there's a better chance that we'll see Canelo and Crawford than there ever was, because I think Canelo saw some things there, and I think he may have gleaned a little confidence. And I think he would say what you said about Mabili being a little too much of a risk, and he can say, nobody knows who he is. It's not a big fight. I'm at the end of my career. I want legacy fights. That's not a legacy fight. So I don't think we'll see that fight. And I think that has a lot to do with it, because I think Canelo knows Mabili is legit. He can punch. And if you stand flat-footed with him, he can hurt you. And we know Canelo, he can move, but that's not who he is.
I'm not sure Canelo's looking for legacy fight. I think Canelo's doing what we just talked about a moment ago as far as navigating the rounds to go the distance. I think he's navigating his career to keep it going as long as possible against guys who would be acceptable. Now, statistically speaking, his last three opponents, counting Edgar Berlanga, all unbeaten, and Jermell Charlo was an acceptable opponent, even though he was a smaller guy. Jaime Munguia was an acceptable opponent because he was unbeaten. Edgar Berlanga is not an acceptable opponent, but statistically speaking, he is. He's unbeaten. So on paper, you can make a case, and you could say 3 unbeaten opponents in a row. But something about Mabili, it's not a gimme for Canelo. I would favor the Canelo right now. I would think he would have the answers, enough foot movement, this, that.
Who would you favor if Mabili fought Berlanga?
Oh, Mabili easy. He'd knock him out.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. Not even a fight there, okay? Not even a fight.
So I think we have Canelo pretty much figured out what he's doing. I mean, I said legacy. I mean, beating the undefeated guys is big. If he fights Terence Crawford and he beat him, does he get a lot out of that? Or will people say the guy jumped 3 weight class?
You do, Frank, in the sense that it would raise Canelo's profile because it's a super fight and so many people would tune in. So many people tune in. And then afterwards, they could say, well, it was a smaller guy. It's this, it's that. And then they would tell him right after the fight to fight David Benavidez. Don't pick on the smaller guys. So some of Canelo's credit would be diminished if he beat Crawford. Because I think Crawford, and I hate to use this word when it comes to Terence Crawford, and you might object to this, I think, oh boy, it pains me, Frank, because I have the utmost respect for Crawford. I think he was slightly tarnished in his last fight. I don't look at him quite as the Superman that he was going into that fight, because even though you felt he clearly won, the signs there, I think he could be had. He reminds me of certain fighters who win a fight before running into problems like Larry Holmes against Tim Witherspoon. There'll be like a close call that'll be like the warning sign. And this may have been Crawford's warning sign that he's ready to be taken. Madrimov is a real good fighter. Okay, I underestimated him. You thought that'd be a much tougher fight for Crawford than I did, so I give you kudos for that. But I think he was slightly tarnished, Crawford, in victory.
Jack, I'm gonna write that fight off again. I thought it would be a more difficult fight. I thought Madrimov caught him at the right time. I think it's a one-off, and I think just because he didn't look like a killer in this last fight doesn't mean that there's not there's still damage out there that he can do. Which brings me to the next point. It showed up a lot this week, and it's been talked about a lot, and basically from Crawford's mouth that, according to His Excellency, Crawford only has interest in fighting Canelo and doesn't want to hear any other names. I'm a huge Crawford fan. Everybody knows that. But what I'm trying to decipher is, what is he saying? Is he saying, I'm at the end of the road, I want that cash out fight, I want my Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler fight? Or does he see risk in guys like Ortiz and Boots, and he doesn't want to fight them, and it won't be much money? So if he has to maybe take a loss, and I have no doubt in my mind that in his mind, but if he has to have a close call or somehow get upset, does he want it to be where he has a little bit of a parachute because he can say he fought a guy 3 weight classes above him? I'm not sure what he's saying.
Consider Crawford's lifestyle. He lives in Omaha. He's happy to live in Omaha. That's his town. He's a family man. He has enough money now to last him the rest of his life and live comfortably. You don't see Crawford driving all these fancy cars. You don't see, I don't know what he does with his money, but he strikes me as a sensible guy when it comes to that. He doesn't strike me as the type of fighter that's going to wind up broke. And he might just be stubborn enough to feel, I just want the biggest possible fight. Don't waste my time with these other guys. But there's nothing he can do about it. If Canelo doesn't come to the table, His Excellency said he's not dealing with Canelo anymore.
He says he's not going to overpay him.
Right, that Canelo isn't sincere. He's going to pay good value for what the fight's worth. And even the Saudis only going to go that far. They're not going to throw money away and want to take $100 million loss or whatever the amount is, in a promotion. And it's a problem. But this guy has to fight someone. If he takes another year off, what's that going to tell you? I mean, how important is legacy to Crawford? You think it is important to him at one end, but in the other end, is he doing all that he can? I sometimes wonder about certain fighters like Crawford, if they truly lived the life of a fighter, fought 3 times a year, always kept in shape, Frank, always kept in shape. And if they acted like a world-class athlete did, and let's say track and field, these guys train all the time. They don't take a couple of months off. How good would Crawford be? But boxers are spoiled. They have the big fight, then they lay off a while. They train light, they wait, and before you know it, they're not fighting for a year.
But you could make a case, though, Jack, that because of the way his career is, at 37, he and Sugar Ray Leonard both had the same amount of fights, but Leonard was taxed much more because of the pace he fought as far as activity early, and you could even say the competition. So I don't know. Jack, I don't know what the answer is, but I know this much. As much as I think of Terence Crawford, and I still think to this day he's underrated, I do think he is one defeat away from being dropped back down to not a Simon Brown level, but maybe a Mark Breland level.
No, Frank, he's going to be right away ahead of Simon Brown. But
if he loses, Jack, that's all we'll talk about.
Doesn't lose. Let's say Crawford fights one more time, for argument's sake. He fights Virgil Ortiz, he knocks him out. Then Crawford says, I'm done with boxing. I have enough money to last me the rest of my life. I'm finished. You can't criticize him for that if he just is tired of the sport and wants to get out. How are we going to perceive him, Frank?
If that happened,
we'll perceive him on the level of maybe an Andre Ward or something like that. And Andre Ward, despite any malarkey you hear from Joe Tessitore, who to me is an excellent broadcaster. I'm not knocking Tessitore himself, but I cringed the times when Andre Ward worked on ESPN and he described Ward as one of the greatest fighters of all time. I mean, I don't want to hear, but he was unbeaten, Ward. But he was unbeaten. And
That does solve a lot of arguments, Jack, or it does put an end to them.
But come on.
I'm talking about the lay fan, Jack, not you and me. I'm talking about the fans out there that watch the fights. If Crawford did what you said, let's just say he fights Ortiz and he wins a conclusive fight, either by decision or he stops him, and he never fights again, I think he goes down as historically being rated a little bit under Mayweather, but over Calzaghe and Andre Ward.
But part of the problem too, Frank, is in modern boxing, fighters aren't married to a weight division, and that helped the old timers. I mean, we could talk about a Marvin Hagler. He was a career middleweight. So when we talk about the greatest middleweights of all time, Hagler enters the discussion as one of them. Crawford, what's his weight class that we're going to talk? We're not going to say he's one of the greatest welterweights of all time.
I would say that.
Yeah, but he didn't spend enough time as a welterweight. You can make.
He made eight defenses there, Jack.
Right. Even when we talk about Pacquiao, we don't talk about a weight division. We don't even Mayweather. I guess it would be welterweight would be his division, but he moved around. Duran, the great Roberto Duran.
He's a lightweight.
We think, but he spent. When you think of his career, he spent as much time in the other weight divisions as he did as a lightweight. But Jack, he was dominant at 135 for 13 years. Baby. One of the best, if not the best lightweight of all time. I'm not, but certain fighters, they just move around. We can't think of them as being in a particular weight division. And I don't think with Crawford or even a Roy Jones, we don't think of them as being in a particular weight division. But we do think of Andre Ward and we think of Joe Calzaghe,
They both fought at 68 and 75.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I know Ward moved up before Kovalev at 175, but yeah, you could make certain arguments. That's why I like the pound for pound thing to a degree, to do comparison. You don't like it, but I think that's maybe.
Jack, what I don't like about it, and I'm glad you said that. Here's what I don't like about it. Crawford fights Madrinev after a few months after Usyk fights Fury. Okay. Usyk, even though it was a closer fight, Usyk at points was more dominant. So after that, everybody says, well, I'm going to move Usyk up and Crawford down. See, to me, I don't like that. Did Crawford become less of a fighter because somebody with an odd style gave him a little trouble for the first time in 8 years? I mean, that's what I don't like about debate. So it's who fought last and had the most impressive knockout.
But that's the way it is on the pound for pound thing. Crawford's victory over Madrimov was less impressive than what Inouye has been doing recently, and less impressive than what Usyk did against Fury.
In that one fight, Jack, yes, it wasn't as dominant, but I take the whole career into consideration.
But what Usyk did was a monster achievement, beating the much bigger guy. That's what pound for pound is about, because heavyweights are normally going to beat every other fighter because they're bigger. So we were talking about Sugar Ray Robinson before. Oh, the greatest fighter of all time. But if he fought Rocky Marciano and they fought at the same time, Marciano probably beats Sugar Ray Robinson in all likelihood.
He knocked Sugar Ray out. He doesn't beat him. He beats him up.
But Sugar Ray would have troubled him for a while. I think that would have given him fits for a while, I think, before. But Marciano would have been a little too relentless and eventually have grinded him down, maybe 10, 11 rounds. That's the way I see it,
Wow, but, Jack, I think it's a 3 or 4 round fight at most.
Oh, no. Well, I disagree.
Rocky style would be, just imagine Rocky in there instead of LaMotta. How much more does Rocky bring compared to LaMotta? A lot.
Yeah, but Rocky build up a full head of steam after a while. He usually wouldn't hurt guys in the early round for the most part.
Jack, the only thing I would say with the Usyk Fury thing is this. Yes, on paper, Usyk gets a lot of credit for beating Fury. But again, if I go back and I look at Fury, barely beat a guy making his pro debut in his last fight. I know that doesn't mean anything on paper because it says he's undefeated. But the fact is, what I saw in the ring that night totally changed my perception of the fight. And I went from liking Fury in the fight to having no doubt that he was going to lose. So he beat the name. I don't think he beat the outstanding version of Fury.
I guess it's still on Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson. Now, talking about credit, if Paul beats Tyson, knocks him out, stops him, he's not going to be given much credit. He'll be given a lot of publicity, recognition.
A lot of money.
A lot of money. Won't be given much credit. They'll say, look, he knocked out a guy close to 60 years old. But let me reverse it. Let's say Iron Mike goes in there and he starches Paul, knocks him out. Social media, Frank, is going to go crazy. And believe it or not, Tyson will be given credit. They'll say, well, Paul beat all these MMA guys. What would be next for Tyson? Are they going to dredge up Holyfield Tyson 3? Or what could be next for Tyson? Or would they? Or would they do this? Tyson, would he be bold enough if Fury upsets Usyk in the rematch? I mean, Tyson Fury, I think, loves Mike Tyson. He was named after him, the name Tyson.
Right.
His own dad says Mike Tyson in his prime would have beaten anyone in the history of boxing. Can you imagine they make that fight? You know, when people would buy it. The talk.
Jack, I put nothing past the boxing public today. Hello, Joe Bergman. Where are you on vacation? I hope you're having a good time. I wish the Phillies would continue their slide, and I have some kind of a hex on the Eagles, hoping that they don't have a good season, even though they're going
in first place. They're going to win their division. So don't.
Are they going to win the National League?
Well, how they'll come out of the playoffs is unpredictable. But they have as good a chance as anyone.
Okay. Well, I hope things fall apart, and I hope they get cold, but I'm not confident that is going to happen. And Jack, as far as Tyson goes, I have we'll to get to that further. I have a lot of thoughts on that fight, but I don't think either guy is going to beat the other convincingly because I beleave it's a work fight.
You don't think it's a real fight?
No.
They haven't announced it as an exhibition.
I don't care what they say, Jack. They can say whatever they want. The next day, change it.
You want to know something? The commissions might be scared of getting in trouble. If you announce that as a sanctioned bout at Tyson's age and he gets hurt, they could have some real problems. If you announce it as an exhibition and they go at it hard, maybe you're not liable the same way.
Yeah, I think we won't know what that fight was until the next day. That's my opinion. All right, Jack, last week you were away. We had Henry Haskap on. I think he's the best researcher in boxing. He is the guy you go to when you want to find out anything regarding records or who fought good guys, who didn't. He laid a lot of numbers on us last week as far as who fought who. What do you think of his system? Because I had a lot of guys text me over, in the last week, and they think it's a little simplistic. I don't think it's simplistic. And I said to Henry, I says, the Ring Magazine ratings, they have been manipulated. And one of the guys said to me, they said, Frank, look, Michael Grant was maybe 2 or 3 when he fought Lennox Lewis. So that Henry considers the guys in the top 3 all-stars, and that's a big win. But he said, just because Michael Grant was 3, does that really make him an all-star? And do we give Lennox Lewis credit because he beat Michael Grant? Or do we give Lennox Lewis the credit because we saw what he brought to the ring? And my only other contention is, Jack, you can move up high and even get into the top 3 by fighting nobody, and then you get that title shot, and then if you get blown out. So it's like as long as you don't lose, You can move up the rankings in the heavyweight, especially in the heavyweight division. You can move up the rankings as long as you don't lose, and they really don't hold it against you that much that maybe you fought some onions.
Yeah, you know what? I look at it. I'm not sure exactly Henry's system. Henry's a close friend and all, but they're four major sanctioning bodies. And I like to look at it this way. Who has the strongest claim to the title? Sometimes someone doesn't. And I can't figure out this lineal mess. You know, I could do it with the heavyweights to a degree because it's gotten so mishmash, Frank. Who knows who the real champ is? But sometimes we do. That one fighter stands head and shoulders above the rest. We were talking about Canelo before. Canelo, we could safely say, is the legitimate world super middleweight champion. We could agree on that, right? We could agree on Bivol. Bivol better be winner. It'll be the clear-cut world light heavyweight champion. And let's say they have to give up their title or whatever. Or let's say they hold on to one sanctioning body belt. So I would consider the other three belt holders in most cases the top three contenders. Okay, that's how I would look at it in most cases. And you judge and rate and compile your data from there. I mean, Roy Jones beat John Ruiz. So in reality, he didn't beat a heavyweight champion. Roy Jones was never the world heavyweight champion.
Not like Michael Spinks, no.
Remarkable. No, Michael Spinks was the world heavyweight champion. He won it legitimately over the legitimate heavyweight champion, Larry Holmes. Jones beating Ruiz was a monster accomplishment. He beat the number 2 and number 3 heavyweight contender. That's
Agreed.
what he really did. And that's a monster accomplishment.
Monumental win.
Yeah, but he didn't win the world heavyweight championship.
Jack, I totally agree. But I do think what I like about Henry's system is when you say this guy didn't fight anybody, he can come back with the numbers and say, well, that's not true. And just like Vladimir Klitschko, everybody excoriated his resume, and he was undefeated for 10 years. And my only thing is I come back to this and say, look, did he fight opposition the likes of Holyfield or Lewis or Ali? No. But I'm sorry, when you own that belt and you're the top guy for 10 years, some of those guys along the way could fight. And you had to beat some good guys. You just don't hold, you're not at the top in any division for 10 years without coming across some guys that can fight. So it's like, I give that a little bit of credit because I get tired of the argument, well, he didn't fight anybody. Okay. Well, I could say Muhammad Ali only fought three guys, Liston, Frazier, and Foreman. After that, it doesn't count, but we know that's not true.
No, it counts. We can name a whole bunch of Ali guys. He's the exception that you don't.
But Jack, remember, Jack, we both were around at the time, and when he was fighting Bonavina and Quarry and Lyle and Cleveland Williams and fighters of that ilk that weren't named Liston, Frazier, Foreman, I remember the guys in the papers covering the fights, and nobody was saying, oh, man, Jerry Quarry is really good. Man, he is a tremendous fighter. Oh, I remember reading if he fought in Joe Lewis's era, they wouldn't have even looked at Quarry as a contender. I know how that goes, and revisionist history guys get better.
If Ali's opponents were a team, and you had a first string, a second string, and a third string team, the guys he beat, the second-tier fighters, the ones behind Foreman, Liston, and Frazier, were far better than the majority of heavyweight championship contenders beaten by other guys.
Jack, yes, we have that privilege looking back.
I think what we do, whenever I throw a fighter's name at you, I'm sure you think the same way I do. The first thing that pops into your head, defining victory. What's his big victory?
Signature wins.
Signature win. Some guys have more impressive signature wins than others, and it's not the fault of the guys with lesser signature wins. They didn't have the right dance partner. We talked about Sugar Ray Robinson before. What pops into your head first and foremost with Sugar Ray Robinson? Opponent
Probably LaMotta and Kid Gavilan.
Okay, Kid Gavilan won't pop into most people's heads. He beat Gavilan twice. They won't think of that, but they'll think about the LaMotta fight where he won the world middleweight title. You know, it's glorified Raging Bull, but it was a big deal before when he batted LaMotta all over the ring. They'll maybe think of the one-punch knockout against Gene Fullmer. It was such a thing of beauty. But, you know, I like to think of Robinson, believe it or not, when he was way past his prime, and would be losing a good number of fights to guys who were contenders, and he always went the distance. As an old man. So that, in a way, to me, added to his greatness.
I can see that, but do you agree, though, as we get away, Ali's opponents look better, as we get away, Lennox Lewis's opponents look better? I think looking back, the guys look better. Jack, I've even had conversation with guys where I think, and I look back, and I mean, in some ways, I look back at the Witherspoons and the Dokeses and Greg Page and Tony Tucker, and I think, and Thomas, those guys look a little better to me than they did then.
We could spin things however we want. I remember like a few years ago, I was sitting with Ron Borges, the great writer from the New England area, and he was talking to me about Tyson. And he was saying, I don't think Tyson, he seriously questioned whether Tyson belonged in the Hall of Fame. He doesn't know.
Which is asinine to me.
I thought it was ridiculous, but he's arguing, well, who's Tyson beaten? And you can start twisting things, well, this. And people like to twist things around. Tyson's an obvious Hall of Famer. I mean, but people sometimes twist things for, in their argument, I should say. They're entitled to their opinion. Look, I was on the Las Vegas committee to vote, Las Vegas Boxing Hall of Fame years ago when Steve Ladd ran it to see who would get into the Las Vegas Boxing Hall of Fame. And of all the voting members, we saw how each of us voted. It was like online, open. And one voter didn't vote for Sugar Ray Robinson, but he voted for Jess Willett. And the only logic I could see behind that, I was saying, well, I guess to his way of thinking, Willett would have beaten Sugar Ray in a head-to-head fight. It was ridiculous to put that down. But people, twist things however they want.
I don't know how you could say Mike Tyson's not a Hall of Famer. Who was he supposed to fight? You can only fight who's there.
You mentioned two fighters. Has he ever been given credit for knocking out Tony Tubbs in 2 rounds? A really good heavyweight. And beating Tony Tucker clearly on points, a really good heavyweight. Stopping Trevor Berbick, a really good heavyweight in 2 rounds.
Pinklin Thomas
has only lost in a round.
And the only guy to stop Larry Holmes.
Yeah, even though Holmes and Thomas were past their prime, they were still good fighters. They were no longer great fighters, but they were good fighters even at the time. Just like when Marciano stopped Joe Louis, he stopped a good fighter in Joe Louis. He wasn't the brown bomber we knew, but he was still good.
I think Borges saying that, Matt, Jack, I just think that there's something that bothers him about Tyson because I just don't think you could be objective. And Borges knows boxing. It's like, I just don't think you could be objective and say that he's not a Hall of Famer. He's one of the top 5 most gifted heavyweights ever. And he cleaned out the division. I don't care what anyone says. He cleaned out the division. It's not his fault that Ali and Frazier weren't there.
Well, let me ask you this, Frank. Now, Tyson, it looks like the fight's going to be going on with Jake Paul. The Tyson legacy, getting knocked out by Jake Paul, it's going to hurt people to see that because Jake Paul's going to be the villain.
It doesn't hurt his legacy, though, Jack.
But seeing Tyson beat up in a high-profile fight as an old guy, Because isn't that going to be hurtful for a lot of people?
We don't want to see it. No, of course not. We don't want to see it. But I mean, Jack, I mean, would we put Joe Louis at 57 in with somebody like that? Would we put Muhammad Ali at 57 in?
60. But you'll have to admit this, Frank. You're going to see the fight, and I'm not knocking you for it. I'm probably going to see it too. You know, a curiosity. I'll put it under the entertainment thing, and I'm going to rationalize, saying let Tyson make his money. He's been a great citizen for a lot of years. I actually met him in Las Vegas in 2006. He was super nice to me, I can tell you. And I met him afterwards also in 2014. He sat next to me for a whole evening at the Boxing Writers Association of America banquet when I was the president. So I like the guy. But if Tyson should knock Jake Paul out, I know I'm going to be giddy the next morning.
It's a good story. And I want to see the old man win. Absolutely.
I'm going to be excited on this show. But let's say Tyson, by some chance, Frank, does it and looks good. Let's say, a couple of lightning combinations.
They'll throw money at him.
Oh, man. What might be on the horizon next?
Jack, they'll throw money at him. And I see Little Holmes talking about the 17 years older came into play. I agree with that. We're not saying that made Tyson a great fighter because he beat Holmes. The fact is that he's the only guy to stop him. And we know Holmes fought for another, they fought in 88. Holmes fought to 92. Right. And the fact is Holmes was never close to being stopped after that. So it's a feather in Tyson's cap that even in old Holmes, nobody else could stop, and he did. So it's like we're not picking on Holmes.
No, we would never pick on Holmes. Holmes is one of the greatest heavyweights of all time.
And he actually ranks higher than Tyson on the all-time great list.
Right. Tyson did not beat a prime Holmes, but he beat a good Holmes, even though Holmes was diminished. It's like a superstar in baseball that hits 330. All of a sudden, he's a 275 hitter. And the pitchers are getting him out. He's not the same player, but he's still
And Don
good.
King didn't give him a lot of time to train. We know all that.
He had enough time to train. That I don't
No,
know.
Jack, he didn't want to fight in January. Don King threw a lot of money at him, and that's why it went.
I don't buy that excuse, but
Jack, it's a fact. Jack, let's talk about something I love to talk about. Okay, somebody put a post up, and I forget what the post was, but I made a comment that Joe Frazier and Roberto Duran, Frazier of the first Ali fight and Duran of the first Leonard fight, I like to call them mission fighters, where they were just on a mission and they weren't going to lose. And when I say that, Jack, I mean, because my buddy Dan Workman argued, he goes, what about Joe Louis and Schmeling? Louis was on a mission against Schmeling, but the difference was he executed him so fast that he didn't have to show his desire as far as being tested, where Frazier and Duran, in order to beat Ali and Leonard, had to walk through a lot of fire, and they just weren't going to be denied. And in my book, I think they're the two that stand out the most when you talk about guys that were on a mission and they just realized, look, Frazier knew he couldn't lose to Ali, or everything he did before would be discounted. And Duran, as great as his run was at lightweight, Leonard showed up and within 3 years overshadowed him. And if he would have lost to him, he would have never come back. So I think in my lifetime, they're the two best mission fighters I've ever seen. What do you think of that? Who comes to your mind?
Well, you talk about Duran. He was just as much on a mission against Kenny Buchanan. I was at the Garden. He was unstoppable in that fight, the first 6-7 rounds. And Buchanan even though he'll never be looked at as such, I'm saying he was one of the greatest lightweights of all time.
I was a big Buchanan fan.
Okay? Buchanan was great. No, if he wasn't so great, he couldn't have withstood Duran's attack, and he would have gone the distance had they not had the controversy at the end of the 13th round when he got hit low. He would have lost a 15-round decision. But I'm not that sure the mission thing. The first Leonard fight, it was Sugar Ray Leonard who showed just as much desire, in the late rounds. What Duran did on his mission, and I don't disagree with what you said, Frank, because Duran essentially won the Leonard fight in the first 4 rounds, because maybe he was on a greater mission than Leonard. You could say that, because Leonard couldn't hold him off. But Leonard's resolve was such that he was actually getting slightly the better of things in the later stages of the fight. He was coming on somewhat. Duran had built his cushion by then. So, but I understand what you're saying. I can't disagree with it. And especially you mentioned Frazier and Duran. Have we had 2 other fighters on a mission like that who just refused to lose? If you're overmatched, it doesn't matter. Like Floyd Patterson, he was on a mission in the rematch with Ingemar Johansson. And he regained the title partly by being on that mission. But had Sonny Liston been there, he would have got knocked out in the round. Like he was probably on a mission in the Liston rematch and got out of this. I understand what you're saying about Joe Louis.
Jack, what I think the things that stand out to me regarding Duran and Frazier, and I'll cover Duran first. And look, I agree with you regarding Buchanan. However, against Leonard, he had so much more to lose. He was fighting a bigger guy. And when we think of Duran today, we think, what is his signature win? And it's Leonard. He can say, I beat, under the worst case scenario, one of the 5 greatest welterweights that ever lived, and I made my mark as a lightweight. So I don't think the comparison quite matches up there, because Duran, I don't even think he was favored against Buchanan. He had nothing to lose, where you could see that Leonard's ascension when he came on as the All-American kid, doing the commercials, and the fact that he was making $1.5 million compared to Leonard's 8, I just think it drove him, and he had to have it that night. So, and it's like, as you said, it was not an easy fight, and Leonard clearly had his moments. So I just think that was a mission that, like, he couldn't be deterred. I think the same thing applies to Frazier and Joe Bergman. If Leonard, who fought Duran differently in the second fight, fought the same way in the first fight, would he have beaten Duran instead of trying to go punch for punch? I'm just going to say this, Joe, and I'm in the minority. I'm not sure I saw a version of Leonard that would have beat Duran that night, and I'm not sure I saw a version of Ali that would have beat Frazier in the fight of the century. That's the best answer I could give you. I mean, there's an argument. If Leonard boxes in the second fight or the first fight, maybe he wins. But I don't know if he could have done that, Joe, because Duran got in his head and kind of wouldn't let him box.
You make me think the comparison, Ali and Frazier and Duran and Leonard, and you made me think of the famous speech that Herb Brooks gave the 1980 United States Olympic team before they played the Soviets, were overwhelming favorites. He said, we could play them 10 times and they might win 9, but not this game, not tonight. And that might be the case with Frazier Ali. They could fight 10 times, and you could say, well, Ali might beat Frazier, 9 out of 10, but not at their very best. If you want to, not that night of March 8th, 1971.
I'll give you one, Jack, where I think another guy was on a mission. And I know you're going to fight me on this and disagree, and we'll just have to disagree. But the night that Bernard Hopkins beat Felix Trinidad, I think he was on the mission of his career, and I think he could have lived with any middleweight in history for the same reason, the fact that it was his signature fight. He was a 2.5 to 1 underdog. He could not lose to Trinidad. And I don't think Hopkins ever was better.
Now, you can make an argument. Hopkins was great that night. I'm going to tell you a guy who was on a mission as much as Duran was, as much as Frazier maybe was, even though nothing compared to the fight of the century. Hagler against Hearns. Hagler was
That was on my list. That's my next list.
Good,
yep.
Good. Right. Had that Hagler showed up against Leonard, I don't think Leonard wins the fight. Coming out that aggressively, I really don't think he beats Hagler. And I think even Leonard acknowledged that to an extent after. He didn't say he thought he'd lose, but Leonard said, fortunately for me, he didn't come out the way he did against Tommy.
Jack, it's hard to picture that Hagler losing. I'll give you that. But when he went into the Hearns fight, remember, Duran had just gone 15 with him. Hearns annihilated Duran. Hagler kind of took some grief because Duran was his signature fight at that time, and he could not lose to Hearns either, or his reputation would have been irreparable. So I think, yes, Hagler was on a mission that night too, and it's hard for me to see many middleweights in history, not named Greb or Robinson, beating him that night.
It's a fine line between these mission fights. There's so few of them around that you could really think of. It's a shorter list than you can imagine. You can't just say a fight is determined. All of them are determined. Like Norton Holmes, the last round of their fight, 15th round, the most phenomenal 15th round I've ever seen. When they had a 15-round championship fights, they both wanted to win badly, but I don't think it was quite the mission fights, like the legendary mission fights.
Jack, I agree, and that's why I'm saying it can't be like, there's a round or two like that. But to me, the way I look at it, Frazier's mindset was winning was life, losing was death. Same thing with Duran against Leonard, probably Hagler and Hearns, probably Hopkins and Trinidad, where it's like the one guy he just knows his career can't be salvaged if he loses to this guy on this night. And that's sort of how I break it down.
You know who was always on a mission, it would seem? Vinny Paz. I remember John Scully saying, former light heavyweight contender, he wasn't willing to die in the ring. He said, so many fighters say they're willing to die in the ring, but he doesn't believe them. He says he only believes one guy actually would have been willing to die in the ring, and that was Vinny Paz. He thought Paz was crazy enough that he was willing to lay it out on the line to that point. But Scully, if he knew he was going to die, if he had to put out a little more, would have said no. But Vinny Paz actually, he thinks would have.
Well, Vinny is a little crazy, and we know that. I don't know if I agree with John that way. I think some guys will just keep going until they just couldn't go anymore. I think Duran and Frazier are two of them. I think Ali's one of them. But it's hard to get in the head like that. But my point is, like, those guys, I mean, could you imagine Duran the morning after the Leonard fight and he lost? I mean, what could he say? Okay, you were overshadowed by the right guy. That's why he got 8 times more money than you. And the same thing with Frazier. If he loses to Ali, they're going to say, okay, you were the caretaker while he was gone. He came back and showed you that he was the man the whole time.
Yeah, it's funny the way these legends like Duran and Tyson evolved in life. Duran's a great guy now. He greets his old opponents so warmly. He likes them. He's friends with them. He calls Leonard, Hearns, Hagler his amigo. And Hagler tragically passed away. But, him and Leonard are close now. That's the thing about it. Him and Hearns are close. I mean, it's a nice thing.
Jack, if Jerry Cooney and Larry Holmes can become friends after what they went through and that year and a half before their fight and the fallout after their fight, if they can become friends, I can't picture any two fighters or maybe athletes ever that competed that can't, bridge the gap and mend the fence as, the years go by.
Well, yeah, that's a segment because we're winding down now. Maybe we could talk a little about next week the most bitter feuds in boxing history and maybe how it turned out after. Were they speaking? Were they cordial? Were they friends? Did the feud continue or what? That's an interesting topic.
Jack, that sounds like a great topic, and I'll just end it with this. Just remember this. We never saw Ali and Frazier embrace each other after any one of the 3 fights. Think about that. If they did, I missed it.
Yeah, okay. That's something to talk about. Yeah, definitely. Okay.
All right,
Frank,
gentlemen.
a lot of fun.
See you next week.